Guten Tag, guten Nachmittag, and good afternoon. Good to see everyone again, and I hope everyone enjoyed a good lunch break. Yeah, it really is fun. On these virtual conferences, there's so much going on behind the scenes, backstage. It's a shame we can't share that all with you, but I could just say there's a lot of people that are coordinating to make sure that all of our tone, that our pictures, that our speakers are lined up. And it was a really intensive couple of minutes here, and we're looking forward now to our next session. This is, for me, truly a highlight of our conference. As I mentioned on our first day, this year's conference will have a special focus on cooperation with the German Commission for UNESCO. They have organized a panel discussion for today and a workshop in the context of the recently adopted UNESCO Recommendation on Open Science. The German Commission for UNESCO invites you now to this panel discussion. They would like to discuss the scope of the UNESCO recommendation, as well as the dynamics it has generated. Among other areas, they will talk about how can individual open science stakeholders capitalize best from the UNESCO recommendation and how they can ensure new dynamic leads to fruitful results for science, society, and also policymaking. It is a great pleasure and an honor to welcome Dr. Lutz Müller, the Deputy Secretary General, German Commission for UNESCO, Germany, who will moderate this panel. I will see you again around 2:30, and I'm very much looking forward to this panel discussion, the title being Promoting Open Science Globally, the UNESCO Recommendation on Open Science. Dr. Lutz Müller, welcome.
Thank you very much, David, and good afternoon to everyone. I hope that all of you had a great lunch, that you used the time well during the break. And now we would like to discuss with you the UNESCO Open Science Recommendation, how it came about and what it does, what it means for the world. Because we have at this meeting, at this Open Science Conference of the Leibniz Foundation, of the Leibniz Association, we have 49 countries represented with 280 participants. That is a lot, but actually it is little compared to the number of the 193 member states of UNESCO that last November have adopted jointly with a huge consensus a new text of international law, a recommendation which is a half-binding text of international law that sets out a new definition of what open science is at the global level and really operationalizes that, what this could mean in practice in the 193 member states of UNESCO. So we will discuss that with an esteemed panel of experts from around the globe about whose participation. I'm really very happy. But we start with two inputs from two experts on the process of establishing that UNESCO international law text, who could not be better placed than the ones that we have. So first we have an input from Ms. Vera Lacoy, and Vera Lacoy, she was actually the chairperson of the negotiations of the intergovernmental negotiations of UNESCO in last year, when 193 member states really reached this consensus, and she guided all of these governments through the process at arriving this result. Very shortly introducing her, Vera Lacoy is an expert of UNESCO affairs, of whom you find no comparable persons anywhere else. She's been the deputy delegate of Santa Lucia to UNESCO for as long as I can remember, and much longer. And she has been the official candidate of Lebanon to the post of the Director General of UNESCO 2017. She teaches international law at Sorbonne University, and there's much more that I could say, but I would like to leave the stage to you, Vera, now to introduce us to how these intergovernmental negotiations have evolved over the last 2 years and what the result of that is. Vera, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lutz, and please, from the outset, allow me to thank you for inviting me to these very important meetings. I'm very honored to be here and to address all of you experts in science. And congratulations for organizing this meeting, because this is one of the things that will keep this recommendation alive and active on the long run. I am here today because I had the privilege to chair the intergovernmental meeting of experts that negotiated the recommendation on open science. In addressing our complex and interconnected environmental, social, economic challenges, the importance of science is quite obvious. Science is at the core actually of all the Sustainable Development Goals. We need sustainable scientific solutions to address the multiple challenges related to water, energy, oceans, land, climate, education, health, and I could go on for a long time. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic reminded us in no uncertain terms that the challenges of our times are not constrained by borders. Therefore, to face them, we need inclusive solutions created and shared by participation of all. In the fight against the pandemic, the international scientific community proved that a more transparent, collaborative, and inclusive science is more effective and expeditious. While 70% of scientific publications are still behind paywalls, in the specific area of COVID-19, according to UNESCO sources, more than 85% of publications were open access and hence available to all. The pandemic showed us the importance of timely and free access to scientific data and publications and information, the importance of scientific collaboration and sharing of information at all levels, the importance of science policy, society dialogue, and of course, the importance of open science. Several decades ago, the open science movement started to transform scientific practices to adapt to the opportunities and challenges of the digital era and the increased societal impact of science. Among these initiatives, of course, you know better than I do, the 2003 Berlin Declaration on Open Access to Knowledge in the Sciences and Humanities. But the overall framework the scientific and policy environment was too fragmented. A global understanding of the meaning, opportunities, and challenges of open science was needed for a fair and equitable operation of open science at different levels and in different parts of the world. This is why UNESCO, at the request of Portugal, and I think their role should be really recognized, decided to launch, with the approval of the executive board, the process for the development of an international standard setting instrument in the form of a UNESCO recommendation. The first draft of the recommendation was developed based on input received through global, regional, and thematic consultations and was submitted to member states in September 2020. My colleagues from the UNESCO Secretariat will tell you much more in more details all about this very exciting process that led to these recommendations. In March 2021, a revised draft based on comments received from 40 member states and other concerned stakeholders was submitted to the member states. And in May 2021, the revised draft was negotiated at the Intergovernmental Committee of Experts that I chaired. This intergovernmental negotiations took place online. It was the first instrument, standard setting instrument of UNESCO negotiated online. And believe me, this led to a lot of worry and nervousness, because this practice of meeting online and negotiating online and decision-making online was very new to us in UNESCO. We started with the executive board, and the experience we had in the first executive board that met online was not very encouraging. Negotiations were very tough. There was more aggressivity. It was much more difficult to find consensus solutions. So it wouldn't surprise you if we came to this meeting to negotiate a standard setting instrument online with a lot of apprehension, especially that just a week before, there was a similar intergovernmental meeting of experts negotiating another UNESCO recommendation at the same time on ethics, the ethics of AI. And the negotiations of that in that meetings were extremely tough, and they were advancing very slowly. So we arrived to this meeting with lots of worries, to tell you the truth. So basically at this meeting, I had to find a way to keep a harmonious atmosphere among some legal and technical experts from over 100 countries to negotiate the draft recommendations with, of course, over 65 observers participating. And for the first time, the participation of observers was very meaningful because they were able to present amendments to the draft in the chat. And many member states that were the only ones entitled to amend the text according to our rules of procedure were using these staffs, these amendments from the observers, scientists, stakeholders from civil society were using these amendments and presenting them to the meeting to be negotiated and adopted. So the input from observers was really meaningful, and they participated actually more than they observed. Over 250 people representing their countries were connected throughout the negotiations of this instrument. The key challenges during the negotiations were mostly building and keeping trust among negotiators, especially online. As I explained before, it was new to us. Agreeing on the definition and key values and principles of open science, agreeing on a level of detail for each element of open science and related action, on a level of technicalities in the text of the recommendation, on a level of ambition that is realistic, and on commitment from member states for implementation and monitoring of the recommendation. And this was a very hard part in the negotiations. The negotiations were an excellent example of science diplomacy at its best. The specific timing with the COVID pandemic clearly helped, indicating the need for a science that is more accessible, equitable, inclusive, and collaborative. And UNESCO was, of course, the right forum for discussion and agreement on such an instrument. The process of negotiations of the draft text of the recommendations was very transparent and very inclusive. For example, all amendments from all member states were examined. Member states were free to comment as many times as they wished and come back, which created a dynamic of exchanges and debates that was very interactive rather than a series of monologue, which is often, unfortunately, the case. So there was a remarkable willingness from member states to listen to and understand each other and compromise to reach consensus. And that is the reason why 193 countries at the UNESCO General Conference in November 2021 could adopt this recommendation by acclamation and without debate. In conclusion, what has changed on the global level? Well, we have a recommendation and it's the first international normative instrument on open science. It contains the first internationally agreed definition on open science. It spells out the consensus on core values and guiding principles of open science. It addresses multiple actors and stakeholders of open science. It recommends actions and on different levels for the principles of open science. It calls for development of a comprehensive open science monitoring framework. And this is, of course, the tough part. But in the end, the biggest challenge is going to be implementation. This is a recommendation. Unfortunately, this is not a convention. It's not hard law. There has to be a very strong political will to implement this recommendation and abide by its principles. And as you know better than I do, a big percentage of investment and research is in the private sector. So how do we bring them in and make them walk this road with us is the big question. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Vera, and really giving us some insights about this unique negotiations. And I have to underline what you just said. It was really outstanding the way that you chaired this meeting in a way that member states and experts could move together and really enrich a text which was exiting these negotiations in a way that was much better than it entered the negotiations. So it was due to your stewardship, and I think we have to thank you once more also in this forum. Otherwise, I think this that would not have been possible. And thank you also for reminding us that we really have to move forward now. The work with this recommendation starts now that we have it. Nothing is can be taken for granted. The real work starts now. So thank you very much for your insights. You will join us on the panel later. For now, thank you for this insight. And I move to the next presenter. And this time we will have, as representatives of the UNESCO Secretariat. You have to understand that UNESCO as an intergovernmental organization is made up of the member states. And at the same time, it has a secretariat of international professionals supporting the work of the member states in such negotiations. And the perspective of the member states of the Secretariat on the process will be presented now by Peggy Oti-Boateng, who at the time was the Director for Science Policy and Science Capacity Building. She's now the Senior Science Advisor in the Natural Science sector, and she will be joined also by her successor in the post of Director for Science Policy, Dr. Raif Faris. But now first we have Peggy to start the presentation. You have a short presentation. Peggy, you have the floor, please. I'm happy to be with you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Excellencies, colleagues, dear friends. It's a great opportunity for us to be here with you to share, this, the process with which we use. And as he indicated, I've been part of this process for the last 3 years, and it's my honor, to present to you. And I'm here with my colleague, the acting director. He will also take over. But without much ado, I'll just go quickly and I say, look, UNESCO's comparative advantage, puts us in a very good opportunity, place to lead this normative instrument. We want science for people, planet, and peace. And COVID, has been a real good, wake-up call for the whole, world to come together. But what are we looking for? We're looking for science that will leave no one behind. And how do we do it? For the main, work that we're doing all over the years, we found out there's a disparity in the whole world. There are various, movements which were driving open science, but we need to have one, inclusive multilingual approach to this open science. So the desirability study we did in 2018 indicated some key areas which to be looking at, that we need to have a common definition of open science. We also need to have shared values and principles, and also, the set of actions. So we were mandated, at the 40th General Conference by 93 states to develop an international standard setting instrument on open science in the form of UNESCO Recommendation on Open Science. And thank you, colleagues, for driving this process. There were many, skeptics, of the open science, but in a way we were lucky with COVID. So on the 30th of March, ministers came together during the COVID time, calling for this particular thing, one common agenda, a global collaboration on open science. And then, again, UNESCO, in collaboration with WHO and the Office of the United Nations High Commission for Human Rights, also had a joint call during the COVID, in a way of how do we respond to COVID, and also using the other in terms of open access, open education. How do we put it all together? So anyway, with the mandates for UNESCO, we, and again, if I said we, all member states agreed with this roadmap, and we carefully couched this roadmap that we need to, first establish, open science partnership. We went further to this, establish open science advisory, and, conducted the electronic consultation. And this took us at least 3 months. And in that case, that time in March, we had an online, which was, many, about 2,900, responded to this. We also had thematic regional consultation meeting, the first one with the African Union. They were very skeptical about how is it not going to, widen the gap between the haves and have-nots. But again, with time, many, of the regional blocks, agreed that it was necessary to have this. But then we need to have an inclusive definition, of the open science. So again, through very consultative process, we had the first draft of the recommendation with further input, then communicated with the DG, with member states, and then we had a special committee. And I'm happy that the chair of the special committee is here, so she will also, give you the detail. And this process was a 2-year process, as you can see, but we're very lucky, and we thank all of you, particularly EU, for being part of this process. So we had the final document, adopted in November 2021. And as indicated, this for us was really all of us, inclusive. You see 2,900 inputs from all the regions. So this is for all of us. And we also need to, push the implementation for all of us. Just to give you the outline of the open science, recommendation, aims and objective, we have the common definition, key pillars, values and principles, areas of action, and also monitoring. And we're happy to have some, experts give their ideas of, what are some of the challenges that, this may offer. But again, that's why we're working with all of you for, the way forward. How do we leapfrog? How do we make sure that we implement this? Again, there are a few challenges, and the pathway may be different in different parts of the world, but we have a common understanding that we need to change the conventional culture of science. We need to build capacity. We need to invest in inadequate infrastructure, including reliable internet connectivity, which we've all seen with the COVID. We also need to align us, incentives and revision of criteria for evaluation of science and excellence in scientific careers. We also need to address, the intended negative consequences of open science practices, such as high article processing, the charges, predatory behavior, migration, and also some of these, these are some of the challenges which we need to overcome. But since then, we've also developed, an implementation strategy. So I will now give the floor to my colleague, Gabe, to provide us with the implementation strategy and how we're going to mobilize, at global level, national level, regional level, even institutional level, to build, a coalition and a consortium for the advancement of open science. So my colleague, Gabe, please, over to you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Peggy, for this. And let me introduce myself. I'm Guy Fariz, and I'm currently the director of PCB, the acting director of PCB at the science sector here in UNESCO. Well, as described by Peggy, there has been a long way that led to the adoption of these recommendations by the member states in November 2021. From now on, I think that the basic task, as we see it, is how to operationalize these recommendations and how to translate that into action on the ground. These are principles, guiding principles, common understandings, etc., and so on. So advancing further definitely will require how we can operationalize that. I would like also to stress another issue here, that it is a joint responsibility, basically, of how to operationalize. It's a responsibility. Yes, UNESCO has a role, but definitely the member states, the various, shall I say, stakeholders are equally, or are actually the ultimate, shall I say, beneficiaries, and definitely we all have a role in this process. UNESCO can basically, our basic things is about exchange of access to information through UNESCO Science Open Solutions. We can have basic tools about forums for exchange, support for, we can provide support for open science policy development, support for open science capacity building in the different factors, monitoring definitely how we are advancing the trends, the impacts, mobilization of the open science partnerships to the best of our ability, be it institutions, individuals, and of course building and facilitating the functions of coalitions and consortia for advancement of this on the science. So for that, we have been there. We're having, shall I say, various potential programs or that we are planning and working towards doing. One of them is the Open Science Toolkit, which is a series of supporting tools for technical briefs, fact sheets, etc., guidelines. Another thing is about collecting and mapping a global, we are thinking of or planning to have a global repository for open science policy instruments, basically mapping existing open science policies, strategies to create this repository. Analyzing another major issue is the financing mechanisms for and incentives, how we can really address that. This is an area that we are also working towards going into. Collecting and updating training material for capacity building and partnerships is another major area. Maybe you would like to go to the second slide. Also, we have some additional things, basically supporting the regional fora, the field offices, open science. We have, for example, CELAC, the African Open Science Platform, Arab Open Science Platform, supporting member states in exchange to develop their national open science policies, strategies, mapping, collecting areas. So basically, this is to function, be it at the field office or at the regional office. Now, I would like just to summarize in a nutshell basic things. We are thinking definitely of the pool, as I said, the toolkit, the repository, the compodium, the open science training, Outlook, and the Open Science Forum. And we are now also, I have to mention, there will be a kind, the thinking is, and this is to be, we are still working on that. The thinking is basically to have an open science steering committee where member states will be represented, as well as scientists, professionals, and then we will have working groups to follow up on all of that. So this is basically what we are trying to do. And as I said, the areas, be it on the strategies, the financing, the infrastructure, capacity building, and the monitoring frameworks. So this is our basic strategy. I will conclude by saying that we are actually currently there will be a meeting on the 28th of March. This meeting, it will be on the 20th online meeting on the implementation of the UNESCO Recommendation of Open Science with partners and member states. And we will have basically in that meeting, it will be organized with member states and our open science partners to inform everyone about the details of more details about our contemplated implementation strategy. And of course, you will be invited. The idea is to share. We would like to share the draft strategy with all, so we can exchange how the different partners will react to that and seek feedback. So this is basically the meeting that I thought of telling you that it's coming on 28th of March, and we will be actually issuing invitations to all. So these are basically the highlights of our, shall I say, way ahead in relation to operationalizing the recommendations of open science. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you. So in conclusion, we realize that open science may differ in different parts of the world, reflecting specific science, technology, and innovation situations and capacity. But there is a profound need now to change the scientific culture, which is from competition to collaboration, for science as a product to science as a process, and science for the selected few to science for all. So thank you very much for giving UNESCO the opportunity. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Peggy and Raif, Peggy Uti-Pateng and Raif Faris from UNESCO Secretariat. And with that, we have ended our list of the speakers who provide us initial input. And I would like now to join our three esteemed other panelists onto the panel. I would like to ask the first question actually to Professor Shinwari. I have already introduced you before. You have participated as well during these regional consultations and the drafting of the recommendation. What have been your most important issues that you wanted to see in the text, and do you think that the final text actually reflects your own priorities with which you entered the negotiations?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. In fact, today we had many events on the same topic on open science. When we come into the recommendation, I was part of the working group of inter-academy partnership. So my concern was mainly equity and equality of gender, specifically women issues in the low and middle income countries, because the priorities in those countries are to educate son rather than daughter. And then when they grow up and the daughters, they become scientists. So they face a lot of issues regarding to open science. And when we say open, transparent, inclusive democracy and all this. So my issue basically, what I believe in is to promote and to help gender balance, specifically women in this part of the world, low and middle income countries, where there are not enough opportunities for them and they don't get equal benefit as compared to men. So that was my major concern when we talk about open science.
And do you think that the recommendation as it has been adopted well reflects this concern? Do you think that gender equality is properly reflected?
Yes, there are two words, but one is equality, one is equity. When we say someone is need more sort of our help or guidance, so I expect equity for female. I think we should be giving them more powers. I give you one example. Yesterday, I was talking about open science in one meeting, and I said, how many presidents of general universities are female in one of the province? And the answer was 0. So that is that we need a leadership role so that they can influence the younger researcher, female researcher, when we say open science, to help them to grow. So it is represented, but I would say equity rather than equality.
And
thank you.
If you're thinking beyond the remit of gender equity and gender equality, if I can ask you a bit more in a more general terms, do you think that this new UNESCO recommendation duly reflects the interests and also the needs of the Global South? And are there some issues that stand out for you in that regard?
Yes, but sometimes I feel UNESCO may also feel be helpless in a way. I give you one example. For example, in the current pandemic, the whole continent of Africa doesn't have any facility of vaccine production. And when it comes to the openness, open science, so the intellectual property rights and other issues related to vaccine production to save humanity, we need to have some kind of, and there is not only intellectual property right, it's WTO, trade-related intellectual property right. So we need, again, to help those marginalized communities to, have access, have free data, have permission to produce things. So in some cases, UNESCO may recommend, but it comes many regimes to get those things done. Like inclusiveness, consultative approach, they did this consultative approach, but inclusiveness of the, I said one segment of female or woman, but the other segment is this whole continent of Africa needs more focus, more help, and more, permissions to do good science. Because if they want, this is not only publication, this is not only science data. When we say open science, it includes many things: access to the lab, participation, travel, mentoring by west to the south, north to south. So there are many issues that we should recommend, that we should have hand-holding of the people who kept at marginalized. And I gave you example of the pandemic in Corona, a vaccine. The rich people were getting, you look at the data, rich have 3 doses of vaccine and poor yet need to have the first dose, many of the poor communities. So if we are the same human being and nobody is safe unless everybody is safe. So that should be the principle, to consider every human being as one unit, and then we can, be safe.
Let me ask you one final question in this first round to you. You have emphasized questions of equity, inequality, and justice for the Global South now a lot. I know that many European delegations have entered this discussion mostly from the perspective of improving the performance, the efficiency, the robustness of science, so more more an efficiency approach. Do you think that the balance between the two approaches, like approaching open science both from an equity and from an efficiency perspective, is this a good balance in the final result?
Yeah, up to some extent, but I would still, add something to it, and that would be that we need to have more scientific collaboration and sharing information with the South. One, and two, not only the South. When we talk about science and open science, science for society, we should remember that whatever money we spend on science, it's not from the somebody government, some president of the country. It is from the poor man tax that they give it to the government, the taxpayer money, we all get it. So we all are responsible back to the society. And there is that we don't have enough mechanism available how to convey the message. I would just add to it the misinformation, disinformation, infodemic, specifically during the crisis of pandemic, that we scientists were not able to communicate properly to the society about, the info like vaccine hesitancy, when we don't treat people if they are, having corona there. So then we marginalize them, many issues. So I would recommend still that the West or the North, whatever you call it, they have the responsibility to have more collaboration, more hand holding of the South to bring them at least a little bit more up. Of course, there's a lot of wastage, there is a lot of things, but we expect this because they are not that much trained. And I would add one more thing, if you allow me, language barrier. English is or you can call it global communication things. So usually it's difficult for the South to even publish because money is one issue. They have to pay double money because they have to correct their English and language and other things also. So that too, we should remember that we are dealing with rather, marginalized community when we deal with the open science.
Well, thank you very much. And I would like now to give the second new panelist the floor, but I, of course, would like to also encourage all other panelists, if they would like to jump in, make a short comment on something that another panelist has said. Please don't hesitate, maybe shortly raise your hand, because then we can also ensure that microphones are properly switched on and off. But I would like first to give Laura really the floor. I have introduced you before as working for Claxo's Latin American Forum for research assessment, and you work at the Argentinian National Council for Scientific Research. Laura, let me start by asking you the same question that I put to Zabta Zinwari before. When you started to be engaged in the UNESCO negotiations, what were your main priorities and that you wanted to see in the text? And have you actually been, in the end, do you think you have been successful with what you wanted to bring in from your perspective of Claxo in Latin America?
Well, thank you very much, Lutz, for this invitation, this conversation, and the question. From Claxo, the Latin American Council of Social Sciences, who participated in the review and the debate of the draft of UNESCO recommendation, we made special emphasis on the importance of universal access to knowledge, the relevance of local scientific production, and the inclusion of different actors in the process of scientific production, and also openness to other knowledge, languages, and different contributions, taking into account the context to ensure fair and symmetric exchanges of scientific knowledge for the welfare of society. These principles reflect the values of a region where open access to knowledge has been a tradition and a norm, as knowledge is historically conceptualized as a public good, even before it was written in capital letters in the vocabulary of publishing world, and where there is a wide range of grassroots and social movements involved in citizen science. we consider that along the way in the declaration, there were several countries, representatives, observers that shared these fundamental principles, as well as some main tensions in the transition to open science. Among them, for example, the inequalities in terms of digital infrastructure, the need to reform a research assessment system, the increasing commoditization of science, and English domain as a prerequisite for interoperability. So this implies that open science requires a regulatory framework, a universal regulatory framework that ensures integrity of information, of equity in the distribution of knowledge, avoiding this commoditization and profit, while guaranteeing respect for diversity. In short, an international collaboration that ensures the survival of knowledge products and universal access to them. And we believe that UNESCO recommendation on open science made a significant step towards this direction.
Thank you very much. Now, from your specific angle as being an expert on scientific evaluation, scientific research assessment, can you describe a little bit better also? I mean, I'm sure that many of our listeners, those who are watching us right now, are also working on research assessment, but can you, from your perspective, describe the significance of open science for research assessment? What does that mean really for the improvement of peer review and quality assurance processes? Maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Yes, of course. There is an imperative to transform the way researchers and research outputs are assessed. This is clearly and urgently worthwhile. Research assessment practices have wide-ranging effects, including the value of research as a global public good, as I mentioned before, the culture of research, the quality of evidence, the prioritization of research and research funding, etc. Open science frameworks are changing traditional ways of doing and communicating research, requiring new thinking on research assessment. Need of research to be global, inclusive, diverse, addressing systematic biases and exclusion in science systems, and helping to serve and advancing research. So regarding particularly the point on research quality, the open science recommendation encourage or helps to broaden the definition of research quality and impact, with a view to allowing science to serve the public good in specific places and contexts. And regarding peer review, the transition to open science, we can say that brought with it a discussion that goes right to the heart of journal peer review, particularly its blind and confidential nature and some distortions in its enforcement. We think that the commoditization of publishing system has also produced a standardization of writing style, with peer review also playing a role in the homogenization of forms, organizations, language, of publication. So the idea of open evaluation is presented in the first instance as an opening of this black box, aiming to increase transparency and the evaluation processes, and also provides some critical approaches for reformulating peer review process. All in all, from Claxon and from the Latin American Forum for Research Assessment, FOLEC in Spanish, and some of our documents on peer review from a Latin American perspective, we think that peer review clearly is not enough, but also with peer review change, we think is not possible. Particularly in the case of Latin America, we need indicators of peer review contents available in journals, books, repositories, and other publishing venues need to be available for research assessment procedures, which today there is an intensive use of mainstream indicators that very poorly reflect the outputs published published in journals within the region, or in recent context published in other platforms or repositories. So we look forward to strengthen peer review processes to help to have indicators and methodologies for research process, and at the same time, we accept this challenge of focusing on innovative forms of evaluation through open science.
Well, thank you very much, Laura. And I would like now to use this opportunity, which fits perfectly well, to introduce our third panelist. I have introduced you as the Deputy Head of the Unit for Open Science before already, Michael Arentoft, before you came onto the panel itself, when we had some technical issues to get this done. Now, as most of the people in the audience probably know, the European Commission is currently taking major steps as well to trying to reform research assessment procedures, tools, approaches. Maybe you can, as a first insight, give us some more insights on how you see this nexus between open science and research assessment from the European Commission's perspective. You have the floor.
Thank you a lot, Lutz. Yes, what I can say as an EC policymaker is that for us, a reform of research assessment is absolutely fundamental. It's a key enabler for making open science the norm for practicing research. But why is that? Well, because the way we assess and so the way we incentivize, the way we reward our researchers, our research teams, our research institutions, but also the way we look at research projects is really key for the motivation. It's really key for the behavior of our researchers, and so it's essential for the well-functioning of the whole research system. But as we know, and as was also pointed out previously, that the current research assess systems, they often use very inappropriate and very narrow criteria and methods. They're based on the quantity of publications in journals with high impact factors. So, and these GIFs, so these journal impact factors, they're used as very poor proxies for the quality of the research, the performance of researchers, and the impact, the potential impact. They reward based on prestige and privilege rather than the true quality, the intrinsic quality and the merits. They reward most often publishing and getting funding for the next research project rather than what we promote as good science, which is open science, sharing, peer reviews, as Laura talked about, societal engagement. So the system does not reward open science practices. It does not reward responsible research and innovation in terms of knowledge and data sharing, in terms of open collaboration. Whereas we know that these practices, they lead to increased quality of the outputs of the research, more efficiency, and at the end of the day, trust in the results that are produced by research. We have seen across internationally and in Europe as well, that some research funders, some research performers are already taking steps to reform, but also this started a decade ago. So we cannot wait another decade. We have to admit that the progress is slow, it's fragmented. So what we have done at the European Commission together with the EU member states is that we have taken action to facilitate the reform, to speed up the reform, to speed up these system changes that are needed so that we have a more an assessment which is based more on qualitative judgments with peer reviews, and only when needed, supported by a more responsible use of quantitative measures. We want an assessment system that incentivizes knowledge and data sharing as early as possible in the process and at all stages. We want to motivate collaboration with society, but also with industry. And we want the whole assessment system to recognize that there is a diversity of research outputs that goes much beyond publications. We want a system that recognizes also the many different tasks that researchers do. They do many more tasks than writing publications and write proposals for the next project. So for over a year now, we have consulted the research stakeholders, and You have seen maybe some of the products that come out in November last year. We issued the results of this consultation, what we call the scoping report. You have seen that the current French presidency had a major conference at the beginning of February. There was the Paris call as well on reforming research assessment. We will engage further with the member states and hope to have council conclusions also in June. And then we're working at the same time towards an agreement that we see being signed with a coalition of those willing to reform the current system, a coalition with research performers, research funders, with national assessment agencies. I checked this morning because we issued also in connection with our scoping report a call for interest of those willing to join the coalition. We have 273 organizations from 34 countries that have expressed an interest in becoming part of this coalition. So once we form the coalition around this agreement, at the same time, they will set up an implementation plan, which will go beyond a declaration, but really have concrete commitments of the signatories to action. So actions with milestones, with timeframes, so that we get this agreement translated into concrete and effective changes. We will have monitoring of progress, mutual learning, a very important part of our initiative as well. We want to create a safe space for the stakeholders so that they can feel safe to experiment, report back to a common good, learn from each other, have evidence of the benefits and of the costs as well, and then progress to a much more improved system. Now, globally, because we're discussing the UNESCO recommendation, and since, of course, also careers are international, projects are international, we are also reaching out internationally for this initiative that, of course, we have triggered in Europe. And also, I have to say, inspired very much by the UNESCO priority area of fostering a new culture of open science and aligning incentives for open science, which is completely in line with what we're doing as well. We have many organizations internationally that have expressed an interest to become part of the coalition. DORA, the International Science Council, RDA, the Research Data Alliance, and CoData, the Global Young Academy, CERN, and again, I should mention, of course, also Glasgow, so Laura's institution. We also proactive in other fora than in connection with the UNESCO recommendation, the Global Research Council that has a working group since I think October, November. This was established. We are participating in that as well. Under the G7, there's also a working group on open science and looking at research assessment and the broader issues of incentives. So I think I'll stop there. I'm sure you have more questions.
I definitely have. I would like to, since you already elaborated a little bit in a broader sense about the connection between open science or the significance of open science for the European Commission. And this is something that Vera has said before. It was actually Portugal, also upon the initiative of former Commissioner Moedas, who started part of the process at the UNESCO level. How do you see, which kind of main priorities do you see for the cooperation of the European Commission with third parties working together hand in hand, such that there is how can Europe not necessarily support other countries, but really work hand in glove such that open science benefits can be optimally shared?
Yes, so we are very happy with the results of the work to prepare this recommendation, and really all the credits go to Peggy and her team at UNESCO. It goes to Vera, the very effective chair. It was impressive what happened in May last year. But also to Lutz and you and our other EU member state representatives to UNESCO, because it really reflects what we see European-wise also as our open science policy priorities. So I already mentioned that we use it already for reaching out internationally to our for our research assessment reform initiative, but we're also making use of it on other policy files. As I said, we're very happy with it because we have the same broad definition of open science. We have the same core values and guiding principles as well. And they're very much in line with the principles and values we set out in November last year under what we call the ERA Pact, or the principles for undertaking research in Europe. Also, if we talk about some of our other initiatives, which matches very well with the recommendation for investing in open science infrastructure and services, what we do with the European Open Science Cloud, and what we do with the Open Research Europe publication platform, which is for immediate open access, post-publication peer review, is also very much in line with that. Practically, also we should mention that this is not only at policy level. I have to say what we're doing at policy level also trickles down into what we practically promote as activities in the labs. Now, you asked also how it fits with our general approach for collaboration internationally. And here, of course, this is a question which is beyond open science as well. Our principles for cooperation with countries outside the EU is, of course, based on mutual interest. We all have an interest to deliver innovation for sustainable development, for inclusive development. So here we have some foci on certain societal challenges, greening, health, digital, and so on. We do our approach in general for collaborating international is for what under the term of what we call open strategic autonomy. So openness is something absolutely that should be there by default. We in all cases seek to preserve openness in our international research collaborations, but at the same time also we want to promote a level playing field. We want to promote reciprocity also with what we're doing. And how do we do that? We do that with what we call underpinning values for international cooperation. And open science is a key underpinning value, together with, of course, also ethics, research integrity, academic freedom, and so on. So these are the principles on which we engage internationally. And as I said, open science is right at the center of that. If I go more in detail, in addition to the Science Cloud, we reach out internationally, both in terms of connections and in terms of mobilizing research outputs. Previously was mentioned both for the other two panelists on open access publishing, where we support both APC-based and non-APC-based, increasingly so. So we are launching several initiatives related to the diamond way of publishing, and we very much inspired what's happening in other parts of the world, and not least on this particular point for what Latin America has also as historically done for non-for-profit open access publishing. So indeed, we are making good use of the UNESCO recommendation to leverage our international outreach on our different initiatives.
Well, thank you very much. I would like to use this opportunity because it fits perfectly well here with one of the first questions from the audience. And I'm not sure, maybe this is something that Peggy or Raif can reply to. This also relates to article processing charges, APCs. And you know that this is specifically here in Europe, the golden way of open access is very much promoted, but in other parts of the world is often quoted not really as a good alternative to the classical way of publishing, because it's very cost intensive as well. So if they are considered as APCs are considered as barriers or bottlenecks in open access publishing, and there are so many other affordable and free of charge journals to publish in, how can we really shift the focus to the opportunities? For example, Michael has just mentioned diamond open access, but also green open access. more use of preprints, etc.? How can we do that? Is there a role that you can see for the UNESCO Secretariat? Peggy, Raith, do you want to answer that?
Well, thank you very much. Definitely having an open access or allowing the opportunity for open, shall I say, for contributing to the building of knowledge and science and through in an open manner, particularly in, shall I say, less developed countries or other countries that where the facilities might not be enough or it might be very costly, is something that we in UNESCO do encourage and do work for. Now, this is something that definitely the tools that were mentioned by Mr. Michael can be implemented or can be activated to the best of our abilities. And this is something that we have been promoting and encouraging, and we will continue to encourage member states. Basically, it's to give the opportunity to all and to make this less tied with the high expenses, as you said, because it might not be affordable to many. So this is definitely something on the radar of UNESCO and something that we can work on. But again, I say it will be a kind of not only our responsibility, because also we need all the partners and entities that would allow us jointly to achieve this aspired goal. Peggy, would you like to comment anything?
Thank you very much. I fully agree with you. And this is why we say this is for all of us. We need to come together, globally, sharing of good practices. So what we need now, sharing the good practices that are available, but you also know that other departments or other sectors of UNESCO, for example, the CEI have all these open access. We have open education. We want to bring all together, and from your experience and the good practices, we share this globally. But this is very important, because that's the only way to reduce the big disparity globally, between the haves and the have-not, between the North and the South, and even within countries and even within continents. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Does anybody else want to comment? Laura, Michael, do you want to any further? No? Okay.
Yes, so as I said, at the Commission, we don't prescribe to one model of open access publishing. We reflect that very much in our program as well. So our beneficiaries of grants, they can publish wherever they want. But what we say is that we only refund publication fees in full open access publishing venues. We do not reimburse costs for publication in hybrid journals, for instance. And in parallel with that, we work also on capacity building. We have already launched last year a call, and we now will support a project for capacity building for institutional open access publishing, so Diamond. And we intend to have another call in the next work program under Horizon Europe, which is about global cooperation for non-for-profit open access publishing. So this is about collaborating with other regions of the world to help tackle issues with Diamond, which are technical capacity, standards, tools that are needed. It's about sustainability and financial models, and there are many of these. And it's about the management of such publication platforms and also marketing. So this is what we are doing on this. And just a reminder also that under our program, we require open access via repositories.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much. Then I would like to take the second question from the audience, which relates this time to open educational resources. And it has, I think, a technical level and a more negotiation level. So maybe I would like to ask Vera first to ask more at the negotiation level. So the person from the audience asks, if I remember correctly, the final version included open educational resources. Yes, indeed it does. And the second version didn't, and the first version also had it. How does it happen that a topic comes in the beginning, drops out, and comes in back. Maybe you can, from your experience, maybe also from the experience of negotiating the UNESCO Open Educational Resources Recommendation 2 years earlier, maybe you can share a little bit of your insights on that.
Well, I can't say exactly when this open resources issue went out and in again. But of course, we all know that the first draft was prepared by what we call a category 6 meeting in our UNESCO jargon, where experts sit in their personal capacity, not representing their governments. Then the text goes out, and the Secretariat of UNESCO distributes it and gets comments from stakeholders and from member states. And then in this process, some might add something and others might ask to delete something. And then we get a kind of a revised version based on all these comments. And then, of course, it is this meeting you attended, Lutz, and that I chaired, that negotiates the text and comes out with the final version that is sent for adoption to the General Conference. So in the course of this long process, there are issues that are deleted by member states and that I brought back again by other member states when the final negotiations takes place and negotiated again. And this is where the final consensus is drawn on whether to keep them or to remove them. And so you will notice that there are many little things that were in the text and were removed or were brought back or were in the draft we got when we were negotiating and were deleted, and other things replaced them. So this is what negotiations is about. And this is the process where we have to compromise and we have to reach an agreement in order to have a consensus in the end and have an instrument that is unanimously adopted, which will make it, of course, more efficient, because if you have several countries rejecting it, that is why we try to avoid voting, especially on declarations and recommendations that are not compulsory. If they're not unanimous, implementation will not be efficient.
Well, thank you very much. Maybe Peggy, you could also have some thoughts about that. How well does open educational resources fit into the text? I'm sure that in the group of experts in the open science panel, there was a lot of discussions on that. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that.
Thank you very much. I think I should put it on record that would really want to thank Madam Chair Vera for steering this. You know, it takes a lot of experience knowing UNESCO's in and out, and she did a fantastic job, such that a meeting that we planned for 3 days, we did it, Vera, in 2 days. 2 days, you know, and thank you very much, Vera, for that. Yes, it was a long process. She did it well, but again, there was a lot of negotiation in the open science, open access, open education materials. People came in, various, you know, like she said, we had experts and various experts came with certain details, but again, we have to negotiate that. And we're also lucky that in UNESCO, education, you know, sector has already got experience in this, and they have also worked with member states and experts. And we also had, you know, in UNESCO itself, we also had inter-sectorial, more or less, working group. So we had all the inputs from the various sectors. So that also made, you know, our work, you know, much easier. And also with the leadership, the ADG, the DG, and the support of everybody, I think we were able to make it. But thank you, Vera, you know, for steering that intergovernmental, which had over 100 countries. There were so many people, but we made it. And such that, just to give you, a feel of the final, it was with an applause. And thank you, for that.
Well, thank you very much. I would like to put this question together with the next question that comes from the chat to the three other panelists, to Michael, Laura, and Professor Saptajanwari. We have, with open educational resources, we have not only higher education within the UNESCO Open Science Recommendation, but basically even more than higher education. Now, the second question comes from the audience. There is a discussion whether the term open research instead of open science would actually be more appropriate. Why do you think we should stick to the term open science instead of open research? And maybe the three of you, Saptajanwari, maybe I've asked the question to you first, and then to Laura and Michael as well. What do you think about that? It should be more focused on research, or is it good to have the outreach to higher education and maybe education at a larger stage?
Thank you. And, this question has raised a very other aspect of science, which we didn't discuss in this forum. And this is good that remind us. That is, open science is as open as you can imagine, but it is as close as you should, because dual use of science. You cannot keep everything open for everybody to use it for whatever. Just a hint of bioweapon and other issues that are related, garage technology, do it yourself. There are many issues that are linked to open science. So open science is open, but with responsibility and with integrity of scientists. It is not as open that we should keep everything out of the window and anybody can come and pick it. It's not that way, number one. Number two, that's why open research or open science are a bit different. So open science is well thought out name that has been given to that. Having said that, I just want to raise two more important issues here. And that is, when we talk about, we talk about open dialogue, and that open dialogue, the science is not only in the lab, it is knowledge of indigenous people. You can talk about, marginalized scholar, you can talk about local communities, and in current scenario, you can talk about immigrant or migratory scientists. You take an example of Afghanistan, Ukraine, and others, that we are facing problem, the scientists, and there too, when you say access, how they can access when they are even having their life, running to save their life and their children and their families. So that is another question that we should always be remembering them when we talk about such issues, openness, that not this openness is not meant only for those living or working in air-conditioned labs, but also for those that are running in the mountains to save themselves and their scientists. So the indigenous communities and others, that we have to remember when we talk about this. And two, when we talk about science, it is not that open. It is science with responsibility and science with integrity and code of conduct for scientists. So this is not only issue of money and publications and all those. We should, in this forum, we should also address the second aspect of it, and I will simplify it with the dual use of education. That is that we have to remember.
Thank you very much. Laura, Michael, do you want to add something?
Yes, of course. In my case, regarding this difference between open science or open research, I think that open research as a term comes from the influence of social sciences and humanities. We talk about researchers and not about scientists. And this exceeds UNESCO. This has to do with the dispute worldwide among disciplines and how we define some terms. That is my opinion. But of course, we converge into many of the principles, but I think that the division is more conceptualized in terms of the origin of disciplines. And regarding this distinction between higher education or talking about widely about education in general, well, we should consider that the main locus of knowledge production and circulation are research centers and universities, and particularly that is the case of Latin America. Yes, more than 65% of the knowledge production is concentrated in universities in the region. But of course, we can also enforce, expand, promote open access principles, resources in other levels of education, yes, higher education, and there are a wide range of experiences regarding citizen science which implement open science principles in those levels. But of course, the research production circulation is concentrated on higher education and research institutes and centers.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Yes, I mean, if it's open science, open research, I mean, for us, it's all about better science, more efficient, more effective research. We also call it digital science or science 2.0. So for us, the term doesn't matter so much. It's all about reflecting also that the research process is in digital transformation. It is becoming more open, more collaborative, more multidisciplinary. It has a larger diversity of outputs, and we need to reflect this in the way research is done. The link to education is also key. We know that we lack the skills for doing this open research, for doing this data-intensive research, which is more and more needed. We need to recognize that we don't have only the researcher as such. We need data stewards, we need data analysts, we need research software engineers, and we need them also to as I said before, to be recognized. There's a link to innovation also. The collaboration with society, but not only, also with public authorities and with industry, what we could call the quadruple helix open cooperation, again, reflects also the link to open innovation, which, by the way, is also reflected in the way we want to see our research data being managed. So to be fair, where the R in fair is about reusability and setting up the conditions for the reuse, so the licensing, which again links into how we want to innovate in an open way.
Yes, Raif, shortly, because we had time is running short.
I'll be very quick in that. Research, open science, and by the way, I'm just expressing a personal opinion, not an opinion of UNESCO, just to stress that. Ultimately, research, I think our ultimate goal is to generate science and to have it an open way. Research is basically a tool. It's basically our tool in generating the science. It can be research for generation of knowledge and science. It can be a tool for the transfer and localization of science and knowledge, and also can be a tool for the deployment and use of the sciences. So definitely in my, so yes, we need both. We need research to be open, available to all, so they can conduct the research, to also, and also generate the open science. I would stick, and here I'm stating a personal opinion, not UNESCO. Definitely, I think the open science is the more, shall I say, comprehensive, and it captures, I think, the concepts and principles that we are about. Thank you.
Just at the last minute, a new question from the audience came in, and that would be the last one that we will take because of the time, but I think it's a really good one, and it also fits very well the UNESCO recommendation. The question is the following. It relates to the demands on digital infrastructure access that are laid out in the recommendation on open science by UNESCO. And to what extent do you think that we should extend those demands by advocating for the necessity of an ubiquitous internet access, or an internet access as a human right, and therefore also as a precondition for open science. I would like to open this question to the floor. I see Laura already nodding very heavily. Maybe you want to start, but also maybe Vera want to say something. You have been in many negotiations on the World Summit on the Information Society. Maybe you want to say something as well.
I would let Laura begin. I'll follow.
Very generous, Vera. Very briefly, we absolutely agree with the internet access as a human right. It's very clear in our region, not only for open science, but for daily life that is needed. And it's a minimum guarantee that we should benefit our researchers, students, and everyone that is producing knowledge in our region. So we absolutely agree on that point. But also, I would like to mention the fact that we need cooperation to reduce digital, technological, and knowledge gaps, and to make emphasis on those cooperations with different orientations, north-south, north-south-south, south-south collaborations, and to generate a federation of infrastructures for open science and digital rights worldwide, and particularly in Latin America and the Caribbean. Just that. Thank you.
Well, Laura, I mean, she said it all. I fully agree with what she said. This is becoming a crucial issue. I mean, let us not fool ourselves with the AI revolution and the direction the world is going, the exponential change that is happening. Without these digital rights, the gap between those who have and those who don't have is going to be even larger than the gap that existed in the industrial era. This is very clear, and this is now a very big issue within the United Nations. If you would like to go read our common agenda, this new social global compact that the Secretary General of the UN is putting now on the table includes these digital rights, and of course the access to technology to bridge this gap that has become a very acute priority.
Well, thank you very much. I would like to ask now everybody to make a very short final statement about what you think as a priority for the way ahead. So how can we fully utilize the potential of open science and also this new text of UNESCO, this international recommendation on open science? How can we best utilize the potential to make it really that it brings the full results for science, for society, and also policy making? I would like to ask each and every one of you make a short final statement to wrap up our discussion, because we are really already running late, but we have 10 extra minutes. So each of you, I would like to invite you maximum 1 minute. Whoever wants to start, you have the floor.
May I?
Please.
Thank you. I would just very simple, very brief, 30 seconds. That we discussed a lot, but the guiding principle that UNESCO document and the recommendations are, if we follow those guiding principles, the 5 words that we have, 6 words: transparency, equality, responsibility, collaboration, flexibility, and sustainability. If we have these 6 words in mind as a guiding principle, all other question comes under it, and then we can really, and when we say open plus science, so transparent and inclusive democracy and sustainable. So these are few guiding principles that will take us along if we really follow those principles. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Raif, you had also raised your hand immediately.
Yes, thank you very much. But in a nutshell, we know the principles, and they were all endorsed, the recommendations endorsed by the member states. Now, I would like to stress the concepts of and we do have the tools. We are trying to establish now these forums, etc., and so on. However, I would like to stress the concept of shared responsibility. It's not. It is a shared responsibility of all, and each one of us, regardless where we are in geography or functions, etc., can be the ambassadors for that. So we can, within our circuits, try to utilize these tools and to capitalize on what the member states already endorsed, and use all of that in advancing this agenda, be it with awareness, be it in our practices of research or practices of transfer localization of science knowledge, in all spheres of our action. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Vera.
Well, from my perspective as a diplomat, I think really the big priority is to make sure that this recommendation will not end up in a drawer, because many recommendations negotiated in UNESCO end up in a drawer because they are not hard law. So there is a huge responsibility to keep this recommendation alive, and the responsibility cannot lie solely on governments. Of course, the monitoring system is totally in the hands of governments, and according to the resolution that goes with this recommendation, they have to report every 4 years. But you need to know that even in conventions where reporting is requested in the convention, many times they don't report. So really UNESCO has a huge role to play, and we're very lucky. We have a great ADG. We have a great team with Peggy and her team. Their responsibility to keep this recommendation alive and to keep the pressure on is crucial. And they are calling for a meeting on the 28th of March, interactive meeting between member states and all stakeholders to discuss the strategy of implementation. And the civil society, scientists themselves, they have to keep using this recommendation. This is the best way to keep it alive. Keep using it, keep mentioning it, and everybody has a responsibility to make sure that it doesn't end up in a drawer. Thank you.
Wonderful final words, but I'd still give Peggy, Michael, and Laura also the opportunity to say some final words.
Yes, thank you all very much for this and for the support. I just want to go back to the first slide I gave. People, planet, and peace. And we can use this open science as a driver, to accelerate this. But as I indicated, UNESCO also has priority. And I think, our priority is gender and Africa. So I'll call on all of us that we need to collaborate with Africa. We need to collaborate globally. But if you really want to see, the fruits of open science, we really must have global collaboration to ensure that we have a world which is for everybody and for the future that we all want. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura, Michael.
Thank you. Well, from Claxo and from Latin America and the Caribbean, we believe that open science implementation through international and regional initiatives is one of the master keys to address sustainable development goals, global grand challenges, and critical situations, particularly in the global south, and to promote more inclusive, diverse, and equity research systems through research assessment reform. And at the same time, we believe that this could contribute to expand citizenship, participation, and engagement in science, and to strengthen at this moment democratic culture in our societies worldwide. So we are working on that. It's enormous, it's huge, it's a huge challenge, but we are working on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me support the three key things that I noted from my fellow panelists. Shared responsibility, absolutely. I mean, the science enterprise is global. We all have a responsibility to contribute. So implementing the recommendation. and we have to ensure that we are in this together. Also, we have not to forget that the researcher is the reason why we're here. We need to involve the scientists themselves. We need to have researchers at the center in all the diversity of disciplines or multidisciplines, if you like. And we need to have a vision that we are trying to create what you could call a global commons of science resources, of knowledge resources, where we have agreed values and principles. And this is where the recommendation is very valuable for how we govern such a governance, where we have in place the right incentives for sharing the knowledge, for sharing the data, for sharing the tools as early as possible, for being open in our collaboration, in particular with society, and to have all of this supported by infrastructures that enable this to happen, that are sustainable, that are interoperable, so that we support our researchers, and I repeat, our researchers at the center, for them to do data-driven and open science.
Well, thank you very much. These were all wonderful final words. With this, I would really like to thank the keynote speakers of today, Vera Lacoy, Peggy Otu-Boateng, Raif Faith, and Professor Shipta Jinwari, Dr. Laura Ravelli, Dr. Michael Arentoft, for being with us for this lunch meeting and this final panel discussion of the Open Science Conference of the Leibniz Research Alliance. I think the main message was given many times now in this final round. It really depends upon you. The participants, the audience of this conference, the stakeholders, the multiplicators of open science, those who are actually in the field. This UNESCO Open Science Recommendation is a tool for you. This is something that you have to make alive as well. It's not just about, we cannot wait for governance decision makers, for the European Commission, for UNESCO, for any other body. We cannot wait for them to do anything for you. We have to be in this together. It's a shared responsibility. This has been said, it's now many times. Thank you very much once more, the panelists, the keynote speakers. Thank you very much as well from our side to the team from Leibniz, to Klaus Tochtermann and Guido Scherp, and all the technicians in the back, to my colleague Fatma. And I would like to just make two short announcements. Some of the panelists and the keynote speakers will be available from 3 o'clock and meet the speakers section of this conference. So those of you who still want to exchange with one of us, not all of us can be there because of other commitments. This is a very busy time for many of us, but you will find several of us in the Meet the Speakers section of the conference. And also at 4 o'clock this afternoon, this will be the final event of this conference, of the Leibniz Open Science Conference, to follow up on something that Peggy just has said, and has been said also by Shipta Jinwari before. We also need to bring Africa on board, and that's why we have, as German Commission for UNESCO, have organized a special event addressing open science in Africa, starting at 4 o'clock this afternoon, where we have more than 50 participants, mainly from Africa, and with more than 8 contributions with the African Open Science Platform and the West and Central African Research Network background. So we are trying to follow up on that immediately, because as you said before, we need to reach out. This is now a global endeavor. Open science base is a global endeavor based on a common joint platform that UNESCO member states and many experts were able to construct over the last 2 years. And with that, I thank you once more, the panelists and keynote speakers. And I hand back over to you, David, as the moderator of this platform, and goodbye from my side.